May 30th, 1942, RAF Scampton, Lincolnshire. The airfield never truly sleeps anymore. It only waits. Wing Commander Thu, John. Johnny. Rhodes stands at the edge of the dispersal, collar turned up against the cold, watching ground crews move like shadows beneath the floodlights. The smell of aviation fuel hangs thick, mixed with damp grass and hot oil. Somewhere nearby, a Lancaster coughs as its 4 Merlin engines are coaxed awake, the sound low and uneven, like a giant clearing its throat before a shout. Rhodes checks his watch. In less than an hour, the sky over Britain will begin to fill, not with fighters, not with reconnaissance aircraft, but with bombers. Hundreds of them. More than have ever flown together in one night before. Tonight is different. Everyone here knows it. No one says it out loud. Inside the briefing hut, pilots sit shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, parachutes at their feet, mugs of tea going cold in their hands. A large map of Western Germany dominates the front wall, its edges curling from repeated pinning and unpinning. A red circle has been drawn around one city, Cologne. Rhodes steps forward as the room quiets. "We're not going in piecemeal," he begins. "No dribs and drabs, no trickle across 6 hours." A murmur ripples through the room. "We go together, we go fast, and we go tonight." Someone at the back exhales slowly. They've heard the rumors about new navigation methods, about compressing the bomber stream, about overwhelming German defenses not with accuracy, but with density. What they haven't heard is confirmation. Until now, at the far end of the room sits Flight Lieutenant Arthur Collins, navigator, pencil poised over his notebook. He glances at the map again, then down at the small stack of papers beside him. Frequencies, call signs, timings. Buried among them is something unfamiliar. A code word, J. Collins doesn't fully understand it yet. Only that it promises something Bomber Command has never truly had. A way to know where you are in the dark, over enemy territory without seeing the ground. The Yitul-Ku. For years, navigation has been a gamble. Dead reckoning. Stars that vanish behind cloud. Rivers that look like roads. Cities mistaken for the wrong cities. Crews have bombed fields, forests, empty countryside. Not because they were careless, but because the night made liars of maps. Tonight, that is supposed to change. As the briefing continues, the scale of the operation sinks in. Over 1,000 aircraft, Wellingtons, Halifaxes, Stirlings, Lancasters, drawn not just from Bomber Command's frontline squadrons, but from training units, conversion flights, anywhere an aircraft and a crew can be made ready. The idea is simple, brutally simple. German night fighters and flak batteries cannot stop what they cannot sort. If bombers arrive in a thin stream, spread over hours, defenses can engage them one by one. If they arrive all at once, in a compressed window, the system breaks down. Searchlights overlap. Controllers lose track. Fighters scramble blindly into traffic jams of targets. Firepower becomes noise. Out on the airfield, Collins climbs into his Lancaster and settles into the navigator's seat. The aircraft vibrates as engines warm, instruments flickering to life. He checks his charts one last time, then switches on the GEE receiver. A faint pattern appears on the screen. Lines, pulses. It doesn't look like certainty, but it's more than they've ever had before. Takeoff begins just after sunset. One by one, bombers roll down the runway and lift into the dark, their navigation lights winking briefly before disappearing. Within minutes, the sky above Lincolnshire is crowded with heavy aircraft climbing through cloud, turning east, forming invisible lanes through the night. From the ground, it sounds like thunder that never ends. From the air, it feels like joining a river. Hours later, over the Netherlands, Collins looks up from his table and catches sight of another Lancaster sliding past off the port wing, barely a few hundred yards away. Then another. And another. They are closer than doctrine ever allowed before. Too close for comfort, but also close enough to feel deliberate. The bomber stream is real now. A continuous flow of aircraft moving at similar speeds, similar altitudes, bound together by timing rather than formation. Ahead, the horizon flickers. Flak. Over Cologne, German air defenses struggle to understand what is happening. Radar screens fill with returns so dense they blur together. Controllers issue orders that contradict each other. Night fighters launch into a sky already crowded with targets, their pilots overwhelmed by choice. Which bomber do you chase when there are dozens in front of you? Searchlights catch one aircraft, then lose it as 10 more pass through the same patch of sky. The system was built to hunt, not to drown. Inside his Lancaster, Collins calls out bearings calmly, adjusting course by seconds, not minutes. Below, the city emerges through cloud breaks. The dark ribbon of the Rhine, the grid of streets, the first fires starting to glow. Bomb doors open. The aircraft shudders. Bombs fall. Not singly, not sporadically, but continuously. Rhodes, flying as part of the stream himself, looks down at the spreading fires and feels a tightening in his chest. This is not precision bombing. It was never meant to be. It is something else entirely, a demonstration, a proof of concept. The night sky, once a barrier, has become a corridor, and Bomber Command has just learned how to fill it. As aircraft turn for home, German defenses are still firing, but now they are firing into emptiness, chasing echoes of a stream that has already passed. On the long flight back, crews say little over the intercom. Exhaustion settles in. So does the awareness that they have crossed a line. Whatever comes next, warfare in the air will not go back to what it was before this night. At dawn, the first bombers begin landing back in England, streaked with exhaust, peppered with flak damage, crews climbing out stiff and silent. The scale of what happened is still impossible to measure, but everyone involved understands one thing. This was not just a raid. It was a new way of fighting. May 31st, 1942, Cologne, Germany. Dawn comes slowly over the Rhine. Smoke hangs low over the city, flattening the light into a dull grey smear. Fires still burn where entire blocks once stood. Fire brigades move through streets choked with rubble, hoses snaking uselessly across broken masonry as water pressure fails again and again. Above it all, church bells ring. Not in order, not in rhythm, but whenever someone thinks to pull a rope. Inside a partially intact air raid headquarters, Oberstleutnant Hans Keller of the Luftwaffe stands over a cluttered plotting table, his tunic dusted with ash. He has not slept. None of them have. The night made no sense. Reports arrived faster than they could be read. Radar screens filled and stayed filled. Telephone lines jammed. Fighter control issued vectors that led nowhere, or everywhere at once. Keller stares at a map peppered with grease pencil marks. So many aircraft, so close together, so fast. This was not how the British had ever operated before. German night fighter doctrine had been built on order. Detection, identification, interception. A bomber appears on radar, a fighter is assigned, searchlights illuminate, flak brackets the target. The system works when targets arrive in manageable numbers, spread out over time. Last night, the system collapsed. Fighters climbed into airspace, already saturated with bombers. Pilots reported seeing multiple targets at once, crossing paths, disappearing into cloud and smoke. Some chased one aircraft only to have 3 more slide past their wings. Searchlights locked onto bombers and immediately lost them as overlapping streams disrupted coordination. Flak batteries fired continuously, barrels glowing, Ammunition stocks draining faster than resupply could keep up. Keller rubs his eyes. They were not defeated by accuracy. They were defeated by volume. By mid-morning, the first intelligence summaries begin to circulate. Over 1,000 British aircraft participated. The raid lasted less than 90 minutes. Damage far exceeds previous attacks. Losses, while heavy, are not decisive. The conclusion is unavoidable. This was not an accident. This was a test. Across the channel, at RAF High Wycombe, Air Marshal Arthur Harris listens as reports come in from squadrons returning from Cologne. Crews describe crowded skies, near misses, flak so dense it felt solid. Navigators report, with disbelief, that they knew where they were most of the time. Knew, not guessed, not hoped, knew. Harris does not smile. He rarely does, but he allows himself a moment of stillness. The theory has worked. For years, Bomber Command has struggled with a brutal truth. Individual bomber crews, scattered across hours of darkness, cannot reliably find and hit defended targets. Losses accumulate. Results disappoint. Crews die without knowing if their bombs mattered. The Cologne raid has rewritten the equation, not by making bombers invisible, but by making them overwhelming. In the days that follow, German defenses scramble to adapt. Night fighter patrols are increased. Flak belts are thickened. New command procedures are drafted. But each change assumes the enemy will behave as before. They will not, because the British have discovered something fundamental about night warfare. Darkness does not belong to the defender. It belongs to whoever can organize chaos faster. Back at Scampton, Collins attends the debriefing, still hollow-eyed from fatigue. He listens as intelligence officers ask about GEE reception, timing accuracy, stream density. When they ask whether he would trust the system again, he answers without hesitation. Yes, the word surprises him. So does the certainty behind it. Within weeks, the concept spreads. Bomber streams become standard. Routes are carefully calculated to compress aircraft into narrow corridors. Timing is refined to the minute. Navigation aids are expanded and improved. Losses remain high, but results improve. And for the first time, Bomber Command feels like an instrument, not a gamble. German intelligence intercepts fragments of this shift. They know something has changed. What they do not yet understand is how far the implications reach. The bomber stream is not just a tactic. It is a philosophy, one that accepts risk in exchange for effect, one that treats airspace as something to be managed, not merely traversed. By late summer 1942, the night skies over Europe no longer behave the way they once did. Defenders chase shadows, attackers arrive in waves, and every raid builds upon the last, refining the machinery of massed aerial assault. The night over Cologne was not remembered because it destroyed a city. It was remembered because it destroyed an assumption that bombers must operate alone, that darkness favors defense, that the sky cannot be filled on command. All three proved false. And somewhere, in planning rooms on both sides of the war, men begin asking the same question. If this worked once, what happens when it is perfected? September 1942. RAF Bomber Command Headquarters, High Wycombe. Rain taps steadily against the windows as cigarette smoke curls towards the ceiling. The room is crowded with senior officers, maps layered atop maps, acetate sheets covered in pencil lines showing routes, timings, altitudes. Air Marshal Arthur Harris stands at the head of the table, hands braced against the wood. What happened over Cologne, he says, voice flat, was not an anomaly. No one interrupts him. For the first time, Harris continues, we controlled the night instead of reacting to it. That sentence lands heavily. Because if it is true, everything else must change. In the months since the Cologne raid, Bomber Command has been experimenting relentlessly. Routes are recalculated to funnel aircraft through narrow corridors of sky. Takeoff times are staggered by minutes, not hours. Altitudes are assigned with ruthless efficiency to prevent collisions while keeping the stream dense. This is no longer flying. It is traffic management at 20,000 feet. At RAF Waddington, Flight Lieutenant Arthur Collins sits hunched over his navigation table once more. But the tools in front of him look different now. GE is no longer a novelty. It is expected. Its quirks are understood, its limits documented. And soon it is supplemented. New aids appear. Oboe, precise but limited to a few aircraft at a time. H2S, still temperamental, but promising something revolutionary. The ability to see the ground through cloud, to recognize coastlines and cities by radar reflection. Each system is imperfect. Together they form a web. Over Germany, Luftwaffe officers feel the pressure building. Night Fighter Commander General Josef Kammhuber pores over reports describing bomber streams that refuse to thin out. His once carefully constructed defense zones, the Kammhuber line, are being bypassed not by stealth, but by saturation. Each zone was designed to handle a handful of bombers at a time. Now, dozens pass through in minutes. Fighters scramble, engage, and are immediately overwhelmed by new targets pouring in behind the first. The line still exists, but it is being stretched until it snaps. On the night of January the 16th, 1943, over the Ruhr, the evolution becomes unmistakable. Bombers arrive in a tightly packed stream, flak exploding continuously as if the sky itself were burning. Fighters dart in and out, claiming kills, but the stream never breaks. Fires bloom below, marking targets for following waves. For crews like Collins's, fear becomes something else. Not a sharp spike, but a constant pressure. You are never alone anymore, but you are never safe. Inside his Lancaster, Collins listens to the steady voice of the pilot, the rhythmic call-outs of the engineer, the occasional clipped report from the wireless operator. They fly on instruments, on timings, on trust. Trust that the aircraft ahead will hold course. Trust that the one behind will not climb into them. Trust that the stream will carry them through. After landing, Collins attends another debrief. Losses are discussed openly now. Percentages, not names. Target photos are reviewed. Fires are analyzed. Bombing density is measured in tons per minute. The language has changed. It is no longer about individual bravery. It is about system performance. German civilians feel that change before they understand it. Raids grow shorter, more intense. Sirens sound later. Fires spread faster. Shelters fill beyond capacity. The sense of randomness gives way to something colder. Inevitability. People begin to say the same thing, over and over. It was all at once. Within Bomber Command, dissent remains. Some officers argue that concentrated bombing increases losses, that compressing aircraft invites disaster, that one mistake could cascade through the stream. They are not wrong, but Harris counters with brutal arithmetic. Spread out, bombers die and accomplish little. Together, they die, but accomplish something. The war has reached a point where effect matters more than elegance. By mid-1943, the doctrine is formalized. The bomber stream is no longer an experiment. It is policy. Training emphasizes timing and discipline over improvisation. Crews learn to fly closer, trust instruments, resist the urge to deviate. Navigation errors are punished not by flak, but by collisions. The night becomes structured, engineered. For the men who fly these missions, the change is psychological as much as tactical. You are no longer a lone aircraft slipping through darkness. You are a component, a moving part inside something vast. And when you look out the cockpit and see another bomber sliding past, wingtips glinting faintly in moonlight, you understand something unsettling. The sky is no longer empty. It belongs to whoever can organize it. Arthur Collins writes in his logbook after another long night over Germany. Navigation held. Stream intact, fires visible at 30 miles. The words are plain, but behind them is the knowledge that air warfare has crossed a threshold. The question now is not whether this method works, it is how far it can be pushed, and what it will ultimately cost. Somewhere ahead, another city waits, and another night is already being planned. July 24th, 1943, over Hamburg. The heat hits first. Flight Lieutenant Arthur Collins feels it even at altitude, a strange rising warmth that shouldn't exist at 20,000 feet. Below him, Hamburg is already burning, not in isolated fires, but in sheets of flame that pulse and merge, throwing light upward through layers of cloud. The bomber stream is perfectly timed, too perfect. As Collins peers through the Astrodome, the city beneath looks alive. Streets glowing, smoke columns twisting into one another, wind patterns behaving unpredictably. This is no longer just bombing. It is a reaction. Down below, the effects of concentrated night bombing have crossed into something new. The fires feed on each other. Heat draws in air from all directions. Wind speeds increase. Roofs lift. People are knocked off their feet by invisible force. A firestorm is forming. No one in the Lancaster planned this outcome in detail. No doctrine manual described it. But it is the logical extension of what the bomber stream was designed to do. Deliver overwhelming force in a compressed window of time. Hamburg becomes proof not just of tactical success, but of strategic terror. German defenses respond with everything they have. Night fighters swarm the stream, attacking from below, from behind, from angles perfected through months of bitter adaptation. New flak patterns erupt. Searchlights interlock. The sky becomes violent in all directions at once. Losses spike. Aircraft collide. Crews die without ever seeing an enemy. For the first time, the bomber stream reveals its most dangerous flaw. When it breaks catastrophically. Inside Bomber Command, arguments flare again. Is the stream too dense? Is the price too high? Are crews becoming expendable components in a machine that no longer distinguishes between success and slaughter? Harris listens, then orders the next raid, because Hamburg proves something else as well. The enemy is no longer able to adapt fast enough. By late 1943, German night fighter tactics grow deadlier, but also more desperate. Fuel shortages limit patrols. Experienced pilots are lost. Radar coverage fractures under pressure from jamming and saturation. Every new defensive measure assumes time. The bomber stream denies it. For Collins and his crew, the war becomes a rhythm of exhaustion and inevitability. Briefing, takeoff, stream, flak, fire, return. Night after night. They learn to recognize cities by the shape of their fires. They learn to trust instruments more than instincts. They learn not to look too long at the empty spaces where other aircraft should be. On the ground, civilians begin to understand that survival now depends less on shelters and more on chance. Raids arrive suddenly, peak violently, and end before defenses can fully respond. The phrase spreads quietly. The English come all at once. The bomber stream has now reshaped both sides of the war. For the attacker, it offers control of time and space. For the defender, it removes choice. You cannot intercept everything. You cannot protect everything. You can only endure. In early 1944, Collins reads an intelligence summary, noting that German air defenses are nearing exhaustion. A strange thought crosses his mind. The bomber stream has done what fighters never could. It has forced the enemy to react constantly and burn out doing so. Yet even as victory inches closer, the cost becomes harder to ignore. Entire crews vanish. Training pipelines strain to replace them. Graves fill quietly in Lincolnshire villages. The doctrine works. but it consumes men at an unforgiving rate. On a cold night after another raid, Collins lingers beside his aircraft long after the engines fall silent. He runs a hand along the fuselage, feeling the heat bleed away. He thinks of the first night, Cologne, when this all began. Back then, the sky felt full for the first time. Now it feels crowded with ghosts. The bomber stream has changed warfare forever. But it has also changed the men who fly within it. They are no longer pioneers. They are operators of a system that cannot stop until the war does. And somewhere ahead, one final question hangs unanswered. What happens when this method is turned loose without restraint? February 1944, over Berlin. The night is no longer black. It glows. Arthur Collins can see the horizon before the target even appears. A low, flickering band of light where fires from previous raids still burn, feeding smoke into the upper air. Berlin lies ahead, invisible beneath cloud, but unmistakable. The bomber stream is already formed, a disciplined procession of aircraft stretching backward into darkness and forward into heat. This is no longer extraordinary. This is routine. Bomber Command has refined the process to something approaching industrial efficiency. Routes are planned days in advance, calculated to the minute. Diversionary raids draw fighters away. Jamming aircraft blanket German radar with noise. Pathfinders mark targets with radar and flares that burn through cloud and smoke alike. The night raid is no longer a gamble. It is a production line. Inside the Lancaster, Collins checks his instruments without urgency. The GEE signal is steady. H2S paints a crude but reliable image of rivers and urban mass below. There is comfort in the repetition, a dangerous comfort, born of familiarity with chaos. Outside, flak bursts punctuate the sky with mechanical regularity. Not aimed, timed. German gunners fire where the stream must be, not where an individual aircraft is. Fighters still attack, but less often now. Fewer interceptors rise to meet the stream. Fuel is precious. Pilots are fewer. The defenders are tired. On the ground in Berlin, civilians hear the sirens later than they used to. There is less warning now. Raids arrive suddenly, peak violently, and end before people fully understand what is happening. The psychological shift is complete. There is no time to hope, only to endure. Back in Britain, Bomber Command's operational language reflects the transformation. Targets are evaluated not by accuracy alone, but by density, timing, continuity. Success is measured in tonnage delivered per minute. The air war has become statistical. German intelligence reports grow bleak. Analysts note that bomber losses, though still significant, no longer disrupt operations. Replacement aircraft and crews flow faster than defenses can adapt. Each night raid drains German resources further. Fuel, ammunition, trained manpower. The bomber stream does not seek decisive battle. It seeks exhaustion. For Collins, the war narrows to the essentials. Maintain position, maintain speed, maintain timing. Deviation is danger, not because of flak alone, but because breaking the stream isolates you. To fall behind is to invite attention. To surge ahead is to fly blind. Survival lies in conformity. He watches another Lancaster slide past his starboard wing, close enough to see the crew silhouetted against the cockpit glow. For a brief moment, the proximity feels reassuring. Then the aircraft vanishes into smoke, and Collins forces himself not to think about it. By mid-1944, the effects are unmistakable. German cities are struck repeatedly, defenses thin. Fighter units are pulled back to protect the Reich from daylight attacks as well. The air war stretches Germany in every direction at once. The night belongs to the bombers. The day is slipping away too. Somewhere in a staff room in High Wycombe, an officer remarks quietly that the bomber stream has done something unprecedented. It has made air power predictable, not safe, not humane, but reliable. For the men who fly these missions, that reliability carries a cost. Fatigue deepens. Losses feel cumulative rather than shocking. Crews stop asking whether the raid matters. They ask only whether they will return. On one return flight, Collins notes in his log, "Stream intact, defenses light, fires extensive." The entry could describe dozens of nights. That is the point. The raid ends. The aircraft turn west. England reappears beneath thinning cloud. Another night completed. Another city changed. The transformation is now irreversible. Bomber warfare has crossed from experiment into doctrine, from doctrine into expectation. The question that once defined the air war, can we reach the target, has been replaced. Now the question is, how often and how hard? The night has been mastered. What remains is deciding how it will be used. May 1945, Europe. The engines are silent now. Arthur Collins stands on the dispersal at RAF Scampton, hands in his pockets, staring at a Lancaster that will never fly again. Its paint is dull, exhaust streaks still etched into the fuselage like scars that no one bothered to wash away. The war in Europe is over. The order came down quietly. No great announcement, just a change in routine that feels almost unreal. For the first time in years, there is no briefing, no map with red circles, no calculated minute where the night will fill with aircraft. The sky is empty. In the weeks that follow, Bomber Command begins to take stock, not just of aircraft lost or cities destroyed, but of what has been learned. Reports are written, doctrines revised, lessons extracted with clinical precision. One conclusion stands above all others. The night raid was no longer an act of navigation. It was an act of organization. Before 1942, bomber warfare had been defined by uncertainty. Crews flew alone, relying on luck, stars, and imperfect instruments. Defenders hunted patiently, one aircraft at a time. Darkness favored whoever waited best. The Cologne raid shattered that balance. It proved that the sky could be managed. That time could be compressed. That defenses built for order could be defeated by controlled chaos. The bomber stream did not win the war by itself, but it changed the terms on which the war was fought. It forced Germany to respond everywhere, every night, with diminishing resources. It drained fuel, pilots, radar operators, flak crews, not in decisive battles, but in relentless attrition. It turned the night into a battlefield measured in minutes and tonnage rather than surprise and chance. Long after the bombs stopped falling, the implications spread outward. Air forces around the world studied the bomber stream. Civil aviation borrowed its principles. Controlled corridors, timed departures, layered altitudes. Air traffic control, as it would later exist, owed more than a little to nights when hundreds of bombers shared the same sky by design. Navigation aids developed for war became foundations for peace. The night, once hostile and unknowable, became charted. Arthur Collins returns to civilian life carrying memories he rarely speaks about. When asked what it was like to fly over Germany, he struggles to answer. Because the most important thing was not fear. It was rhythm, the steady engine note, the constant presence of other aircraft, the knowledge that survival depended on staying exactly where you were meant to be. In Germany, cities rebuild slowly. Streets are widened, fire breaks planned, shelters redesigned. Planners acknowledge, quietly, that the old assumptions no longer apply. You cannot defend against everything. You cannot respond fast enough when the sky fills at once. Historians will argue for decades about morality, effectiveness, necessity. Those debates matter, but they do not change what happened on the night of May 30th, 1942. On that night, bomber warfare crossed a line. It stopped being about individual aircraft slipping through darkness. and became about systems overwhelming systems. The night raid did not just change tactics, it changed expectations. After Cologne, no air force could plan for piecemeal attack again. No defense could assume time would be on its side. The Skamorthirchen, once vast and empire, had proven capable of saturation forever. Years later, when jets streak across night skies in precise lanes, when airports choreograph thousands of movements in darkness without collision, the lineage is invisible but direct. The night raid taught humanity how to fill the sky. And once learned, that knowledge could not be unlearned. Arthur Collins looks once more at the silent Lancaster, then turns away. The war that taught the world how to own the night is over, but the night itself will never belong to chance again. May 1945, Europe. The engines are silent now. Arthur Collins stands on the dispersal at RAF Scampton, hands in his pockets, staring at a Lancaster that will never fly again. Its paint is dull, exhaust streaks still etched into the fuselage like scars that no one bothered to wash away. The war in Europe is over. The order came down quietly. No great announcement, just a change in routine that feels almost unreal. For the first time in years, there is no briefing, no map with red circles, no calculated minute where the night will fill with aircraft. The sky is empty. In the weeks that follow, Bomber Command begins to take stock, not just of aircraft lost or cities destroyed, but of what has been learned. Reports are written, doctrines revised, lessons extracted with clinical precision. One conclusion stands above all others. The night raid was no longer an act of navigation. It was an act of organization. Before 1942, bomber warfare had been defined by uncertainty. Crews flew alone, relying on luck, stars, and imperfect instruments. Defenders hunted patiently, one aircraft at a time. Darkness favored whoever waited best. The Cologne raid shattered that balance. It proved that the sky could be managed, that time could be compressed, that defenses built for order could be defeated by controlled chaos. The bomber stream did not win the war by itself, but it changed the terms on which the war was fought. It forced Germany to respond everywhere, every night, with diminishing resources. It drained fuel, pilots, radar operators, flak crews, not in decisive battles, but in relentless attrition. It turned the night into a battlefield measured in minutes and tonnage rather than surprise and chance. Long after the bombs stopped falling, the implications spread outward. Air forces around the world studied the bomber stream. Civil aviation borrowed its principles. Controlled corridors, timed departures, layered altitudes. Air traffic control, as it would later exist, owed more than a little to nights when hundreds of bombers shared the same sky by design. Navigation aids developed for war became foundations for peace. The night, once hostile and unknowable, became charted. Arthur Collins returns to civilian life carrying memories he rarely speaks about. When asked what it was like to fly over Germany, he struggles to answer. Because the most important thing was not fear. It was rhythm, the steady engine note, the constant presence of other aircraft, the knowledge that survival depended on staying exactly where you were meant to be. In Germany, cities rebuild slowly. Streets are widened, fire breaks planned, shelters redesigned. Planners acknowledge, quietly, that the old assumptions no longer apply. You cannot defend against everything. You cannot respond fast enough when the sky fills at once. Historians will argue for decades about morality, effectiveness, necessity. Those debates matter, but they do not change what happened on the night of May 30th, 1942. On that night, bomber warfare crossed a line. It stopped being about individual aircraft slipping through darkness and became about systems overwhelming systems. The night raid did not just change tactics, it changed expectations. After Cologne, No air force could plan for piecemeal attack again. No defense could assume time would be on its side. The Skamu, once vast and empire, had proven capable of saturation forever. Years later, when jets streak across night skies in precise lanes, when airports choreograph thousands of movements in darkness without collision, the lineage is invisible but direct. The night raid taught humanity how to fill the sky. And once learned, that knowledge could not be unlearned. Arthur Collins looks once more at the silent Lancaster, then turns away. The war that taught the world how to own the night is over, but the night itself will never belong to chance again.